Commander Tad Jenkins stood at parade rest, hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the gleaming auditorium of the Galactic Military Academy. The polished chrome surfaces and holographic displays were a far cry from the mud-caked training grounds of Earth where he'd spent most of his career. His weathered face, crisscrossed with scars that the aliens could have easily removed with their advanced tech, scars he'd stubbornly refused to part with, reflected dimly in the shiny floor. "Commander Jenkins, the cadets are assembled and awaiting your instruction," chirped his AI assistant, a floating orb that the Academy had assigned him. Jenkins had named it Bouncy, much to the horror of the Academy's administration. "Thanks, Bouncy, and stop hovering so close. You're making my neck hairs stand up." "That is physically impossible given my non-magnetic construction, Commander," Jenkins sighed. "It's called a figure of speech. We'll work on that." He squared his shoulders and marched through the automatic doors into the lecture hall. 40 pairs of eyes, well, actually closer to 100, considering the multiple-eyed species turned to stare at him, some with disdain, others with curiosity, but all with that same look he'd seen countless times before, the look that said, "So this is a human, how disappointing." Jenkins cleared his throat. "Good morning, cadets. I am Commander Tad Jenkins, Earth Defense Force, retired." "That's Earth with an E, not Earth, Earth or whatever your translator is telling you. You've all been selected for this advanced combat training course because you're supposedly the best the galaxy has to offer." A tentacled cadet in the front row wriggled in what Jenkins had learned was a gesture of superiority. "Forgive me, Commander, but isn't it unusual for a species as developmentally nascent as humans to be instructing advanced combat techniques?" Jenkins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good question, Cadet. What's your name?" "Vrixtal, sir, 7th-generation military strategist from the Dorvanian Empire." "Well, Vrixtal, let me put it this way. Humans have been invited to join the Galactic Confederation for exactly 15 standard years. In that time, we've won every single interspecies combat tournament, established the record for most successful military campaigns against the Hive, and my personal favorite, survived multiple extinction-level events without any of your fancy tech. The Academy brought me here because while you all excel at theoretical combat using your advanced weapons and elegant strategies, none of you have the first clue about fighting dirty." A murmur ran through the classroom. Jenkins grinned properly this time, showing teeth in a way he knew made most species uncomfortable. "Over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to show you how humans train, not the sanitized version you've seen in your textbooks, the real deal. By the end you'll either understand why humans are the most feared combatants in the known galaxy, or you'll wash out and tell your friends the stories. Either way, it starts today." He slapped a hand against the control panel, and the classroom's immaculate lighting dimmed as a holographic Earth appeared over his head. "Lesson 1 begins at 0500 hours tomorrow. Wear something you don't mind getting absolutely destroyed. Welcome to Human Combat 101, cadets." Class dismissed. As they filed out, muttering among themselves, Jenkins caught snippets of conversation, primitive teaching methods, biological limitations, technological inferiority. He'd heard it all before. Let them talk now. By this time tomorrow they wouldn't have the energy left to complain. Bouncy hovered near his shoulder. "Commander, your heart rate indicates amusement. May I inquire as to the source?" Jenkins chuckled. "They have no idea what's coming, Bouncy, no idea at all." At precisely 0459 hours Commander Jenkins stood in the Academy's eastern field, a patch of carefully maintained pseudo-grass that gleamed with a faint bioluminescence in the pre-dawn light. Behind him stretched an obstacle course that would have looked primitive and almost quaint to most galactic citizens: ropes, walls, mud pits, and what appeared to be oversized tires. Nothing holographic, nothing automated, nothing that beeped or hovered, or self-adjusted. The first cadet arrived at exactly 0500. Jenkins wasn't surprised to see it was Vrixtal, the tentacled know-it-all from yesterday. The Dorvanian moved with precise calculated steps, each tentacle touching down in perfect sequence. "Commander," said Vrixtal with a slight bow, "I trust this course has been adapted for multi-limbed species." Jenkins snorted. "Nope." Before Vrixtal could protest, 3 more cadets arrived together. Jenkins recognized them as a luminarian light being named Glows, whose body flickered between solid and gaseous states. A bulky rock-like granithian called Pebble, an ironic nickname given the cadet, stood 7 feet tall, and a spindly insectoid Kriz, who went by Clicks. "Good morning, Commander Human." Glows's voice resonated like wind chimes. "We have compiled extensive research on historical Earth military training. We find it charmingly rustic." Clicks chittered, and what Jenkins had learned was laughter. My exoskeleton alone would shatter these primitive structures. More cadets trickled in. A gelatinous blob named Wobbles, who served as the class medic, a duo of telepathic twins from Mentaxes called Thought and Afterthought, and a reptilian Slithian named Fang, who kept flicking a forked tongue toward Jenkins, as if trying to taste his intentions. The last to arrive, huffing and puffing at 0507, was a furry mammalian cadet named Fluff. Despite looking like a cross between a teddy bear and a wolverine, Fluff had the Academy's highest marks in energy weapons. "Sorry, Commander," Fluff wheezed. "The gravitational settings in this sector are difficult for my species." Jenkins just checked his old-fashioned wristwatch, pointedly. 7 minutes late means 7 extra laps for everyone at the end. Courtesy of Cadet Fluff. Groans and glares were directed at the furry cadet, who shrank visibly. "Now, let's get acquainted properly," Jenkins said, pacing before them. "You all know me, but I need to know what I'm working with. State your name, species, and primary combat specialty." Vrixtal, Dorvanian, strategic planning, and multi-dimensional chess combat. Jenkins blinked. Chess combat? That's not a thing. It most certainly is, Commander. The Galactic Council recognized it as a legitimate military discipline after the great board game wars of. Moving on, Jenkins interrupted. One by one, the cadets introduced themselves, each specialty sounding more ridiculous than the last to Jenkins' ears. Glows is specialized in photonic intimidation tactics. Pebble was an expert in stationary defense posturing. Clicks had mastered psychological chittering warfare. The twins communicated telepathically, so Jenkins only heard half their introduction. Wobbles could apparently absorb enemy projectiles into his gelatinous body. Fang practiced something called evolutionary superiority diplomacy. When they finished, Jenkins rubbed his temples. "So, if I'm hearing this correctly, none of you have ever actually fought something physically." Vrixtal's tentacles coiled indignantly. "Commander, physical combat is considered a last resort among civilized species. Modern warfare is conducted primarily through advanced AI simulations, strategic resource allocation, and when necessary, remote drone operations." And how'd that work out against the Hive? An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The Hive, an insectoid collective mind that had nearly conquered half the galaxy before humans helped push them back, remained a sore subject. Clicks, despite being insectoid himself, was the first to speak up. "My species does not appreciate the comparison, Commander." "Not comparing, just reminding. The Hive almost steamrolled the Confederation until humans joined and introduced you all to the concept of boots on the ground. Which brings me to today's lesson." Jenkins gestured to the obstacle course behind him. "This, cadets, is what humans call basic training. On Earth, we put teenagers through this. It's considered easy." Pebble rumbled with what might have been laughter. "My body density would crush these structures." "Then I guess you'll have to figure out how to be less dense," Jenkins replied with a straight face. "The point isn't to show off your species' natural advantages. It's to adapt, overcome, and work together despite your differences." Glows flickered nervously. "Commander, I literally become intangible when stressed. How am I supposed to climb a physical rope?"
"Figure it out," Jenkins said flatly. "Because in combat, the enemy doesn't care about your excuses. The Hive sure didn't." Fang hissed softly. "This sim's designed specifically to disadvantage non-human physiologies." "Funny thing about the universe," Jenkins replied. "It doesn't design itself around your comfort either. Now everyone line up. First challenge. A simple 2-mile run, through the mud, carrying these." He kicked open a crate filled with what looked like primitive projectile weapons. "Are those gunpowder weapons?" Vrixtal's voice dripped with disdain. "Replicas, loaded with weights to simulate the real thing. Obsolete by your standards, sure, but try carrying one through a swamp for a few hours. You might develop some respect for your ancestors." As the cadets reluctantly picked up the replicas, their expressions ranging from disgust to bewilderment, Jenkins allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 of destroying their preconceptions was complete. Now came the fun part. "Oh, and one more thing," he added casually. "Last cadet to complete each exercise gets volunteered for what we humans call latrine duty. I believe your translators will explain what that means." The cadets' faces, or whatever passed for faces among the various species, registered horror as their translation implants provided the definition. "But that's biological waste management." Wobbles quivered indignantly. "Welcome to human combat training." Jenkins grinned. "Now move out." The morning sun crested over the Academy's artificial horizon just in time to illuminate the spectacle of elite alien cadets attempting their first human-style training exercise. It wasn't going well. This is physically impossible. Vrixiptal's tentacles flailed as Jenkins had recently learned Dorvanians used male pronouns despite having 17 genders, tried to climb the mud-slicked wall. His suction cups, normally quite efficient on smooth surfaces, kept getting clogged with dirt. 20 yards ahead, Pebble had sunk waist-deep into a mud pit, his dense stone body creating what was essentially quicksand. "Commander, I am experiencing gravitational complications. That's called sinking," Cadet Jenkins called out, sipping from a steaming mug that read human tears in standard galactic. "Try distributing your weight, or maybe be less rock-like for 5 minutes. That is not how biology functions," Pebble bellowed. Farther along the course, Glows was having the opposite problem. Every time the Luminarian attempted to grab the rope swing, their light-based form would instinctively shift to its gaseous state, passing right through the solid object. "Focus, Glows, maintain molecular cohesion," Jenkins shouted. "I am trying." The alien's voice wavered like a dying light bulb. "My species evolved specifically to avoid physical contact with threats." Jenkins took another sip. "And how's that working out for you right now?" Meanwhile, the twins thought and afterthought had developed a unique approach to the obstacle course. Since they shared a partially linked consciousness, one would attempt an obstacle while the other observed, telepathically learning from the first mistakes. It was clever, Jenkins had to admit, until they reached the balance beam over a particularly deep mud pit. Cadet thought, "Keep your center of gravity low," Jenkins advised, as the alien wobbled precariously. "I am receiving contradictory mental imagery from afterthought," Thought replied, visibly struggling to concentrate. "Then maybe stop with the mind meld for 5 seconds, and focus on not falling in the splash." "Mud," Jenkins finished, as Thought disappeared beneath the brown surface. Clicks, at least, seemed to be having a more successful time. The insectoid's exoskeleton provided excellent support, and multiple limbs gave advantages on climbing obstacles. But even Click stumbled when faced with the tire run. "These circular objects are inefficiently spaced for my locomotion pattern." Clicks chittered in frustration. "That's the point," Jenkins called back. "Adapt." Fang was slithering through the course with reasonable efficiency until reaching the monkey bars. Lacking proper hands, the reptilian kept wrapping around the bars instead, getting tangled in their own elongated body. "Commander, this is discriminatory against appendage-limited species," Fang hissed. "Tell that to the maintenance shaft you might need to escape through someday," Jenkins replied, unsympathetically. The most surprising performance came from Fluff, who despite being late earlier, was navigating the course with unexpected determination. The furry cadet was soaked, mud-caked, and clearly exhausted, but kept pushing forward with a grimace that showed all 32 of their sharp little teeth. Wobbles, however, was having what Jenkins could only describe as an existential crisis. The gelatinous cadet had absorbed so much mud that their normally translucent blue body had turned a murky brown, and they could barely maintain their form. "I am experiencing contamination," Wobbles burbled unhappily. "My cellular integrity is compromised by non-sterile particles. We humans call that getting dirty," Jenkins remarked. "Builds character. It builds nothing but bacterial colonies." 2 hours into what should have been a 30-minute exercise, Jenkins blew his whistle. The cadets froze in various states of muddy distress. "Gather round if you can still move," he ordered. They assembled before him, a sorry sight that would have had their various species military attachés filing formal complaints. Vrixiptal's tentacles drooped with exhaustion. Pebble was now more mud creature than rock being. Glows flickered weakly, their usual brilliant light dimmed to a sad glow. The twins were covered in identical patterns of mud, making them actually look like twins for once. Click's exoskeleton was jammed with dirt in every joint. Fang's scales were caked to the point where the reptilian looked twice as thick. Wobbles had given up on maintaining humanoid form, and was just a sad puddle. Only Fluff, despite being completely unrecognizable under a layer of mud, seemed to be standing relatively straight. "Congratulations," Jenkins said flatly. "You've all failed the first exercise." "But Commander," Vrixiptal protested weakly, "these obstacles were clearly designed for human physiologies. It was an impossible task." "Was it?" Jenkins pointed to a group of Academy staff watching from a nearby hill. "Because those janitorial staff members can complete this course in under 20 minutes, and they include species from most of your home worlds." The cadets turned to look, shocked to see a Dorvanian among the staff casually waving a tentacle at them. The first lesson of human combat training isn't about physical prowess, Jenkins continued. It's about mental fortitude. You all gave up because you decided the task was impossible for your species. You leaned into your limitations instead of finding ways around them. But, clicks began. No buts, Jenkins cut him off. While you were all busy complaining, did anyone notice Cadet Fluff's approach? All eyes turned to the mud-covered furball. Cadet Fluff, Jenkins said. Explain your method. Fluff shifted uncomfortably. I just stopped thinking about being a Fluffarian, and started thinking about each obstacle individually. When I couldn't climb, I dug. When I couldn't jump, I swung. I just adapted. Precisely, Jenkins nodded. Humans aren't the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species. We can't photosynthesize, we can't regrow limbs, we can't communicate telepathically. But we can look at a problem from different angles, until we find a solution that works with what we've got. The cadets exchanged glances, mud dripping from various appendages. Now, Jenkins clapped his hands together, creating a small splatter of mud. You've got 15 minutes to clean up before classroom theory begins. And since Cadet Wobbles came in last, yes, being a puddle counts as incomplete. They'll be handling the latrine duty. As the dejected cadets squelched away, Jenkins caught Fluff trying to discreetly remove something from their fur. What's that, Cadet? Fluff froze, then reluctantly held out a small crude device fashioned from parts of their uniform, and what looked like a stolen Academy datapad. I made a mini tractor beam to help with the rope climb. Fluff admitted. I'm sorry for cheating, Commander. Jenkins stared at the improvised device, then broke into the first genuine smile the cadets had seen. Cheating, Cadet, that's the most human thing I've seen all day. We call that tactical innovation. Keep it up. He handed the device back to the stunned Fluffarian. Just don't tell the others. Let them figure it out themselves. As Fluff scurried away, Jenkins murmured to Bouncy, who had been recording the entire exercise. Make a note. Cadet Fluff, potential officer material. Noted, Commander, Bouncy chirped. Though I feel compelled to point out that such unorthodox methods would not be sanctioned in standard Confederation training protocols. And that, Jenkins replied, watching his mud-covered cadets trudge toward the showers, is exactly why humans win wars. The afternoon found Commander Jenkins' class in a standard Academy lecture hall, though the cadets looked anything but standard. Despite their best efforts to clean up, evidence of the morning's mud bath lingered. Clicks still had dirt packed into joint crevices. Vrixibtal's tentacles had a distinctly brownish tinge. Pebble had hardened mud in places that apparently even sonic showers couldn't reach. And poor Wobbles, fresh from latrine duty, was a slightly greener shade of blue than before. Jenkins paced at the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. So who can tell me why humans have never lost a ground war against technologically superior forces?
Silence. Anyone? You're supposed to be the best tactical minds in the Confederation. Vrixbull reluctantly raised a tentacle. Because humans are irrationally persistent. Close. Anyone else? Glows flickered thoughtfully. Your species possesses an unusually high pain tolerance combined with primitive aggression responses. Getting warmer. Fluff, sitting in the back row, spoke up. Because humans don't follow the rules. Jenkins pointed at the furry cadet. Bingo. He tapped a control panel, and the room's holographic display activated, showing footage from various human conflicts throughout history. Galactic Military Doctrine emphasizes standardized responses, perfect execution of predetermined tactics, and sophisticated technological solutions. Jenkins explained. But humans? We're messy. We improvise. We use whatever's available. The display showed a historical battle where soldiers used a rudimentary camouflage technique. See this? Early human warriors covered themselves in mud to avoid detection. Like this morning's exercise, Fang hissed with sudden comprehension. Exactly. Not because it was pleasant or dignified, but because it worked. Jenkins swiped to a new image, or this soldiers using enemy uniforms to infiltrate bases, or here, converting civilian vehicles for military use. Vrixbull's tentacles curled with distaste. Such methods violate at least 73 sections of the Galactic Combat Code, and that's precisely why they work. Jenkins countered. The enemy expects you to follow the rules. When you don't, you gain the advantage of surprise. Clicks chittered skeptically. But codes of conduct exist for a reason, Commander. Without standardization, combat becomes chaos. Is a ladder. Clicks. The insectoid's antenna twitched in confusion. A what?
It's a human saying. It means Jenkins paused, then shook his head. Never mind. The point is, chaos favors the prepared mind. The one who can adapt fastest wins. He pulled up another holographic display, this one showing what appeared to be a mathematical equation. This is what your tactical training looks like. A leads to B leads to C. Logical, predictable, efficient. He wiped it away with a gesture and scrawled a messy diagram with multiple branching paths, loops and question marks. This is human tactical thinking. The twins exchanged a concerned glance. That appears to be random, Thought observed. It's not random, it's flexible, Jenkins corrected. Humans operate on something we call the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, then repeat, constantly. We're not following a script, we're reacting in real time, exploiting whatever opportunities arise. Pebble rumbled thoughtfully. This explains much about human military success against the Hive. The collective consciousness was unable to predict such irregular strategies. Precisely. The Hive expected everyone to play by Galactic Combat Code rules. Humans showed up with duct tape and improvised explosives. Duct tape? Wobbles burbled, still emanating a faint disinfectant smell. Jenkins reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of silvery adhesive material. This, cadets, is humanity's greatest invention. It fixes everything from spacecraft hull breaches to broken bones in a pinch. He tossed it to Wobbles, who absorbed it into their gelatinous form with a surprised gurgle. "Commander," the cadet protested, "I've assimilated an unknown substance, and now you're learning adaptability," Jenkins replied with a grin. "Figure out how to get it out. Consider it part of today's lesson." As Wobbles struggled to expel the tape from their semi-solid form, Jenkins continued. "The fundamental difference between human and Confederation combat philosophy boils down to this. You train for perfection in ideal conditions. We train for effectiveness in terrible conditions." Glow's light dimmed thoughtfully. "Our instructors always emphasized precision and form, which works great until someone throws mud in your sensors," Jenkins pointed out. "How many of you have trained while hungry, while sleep-deprived, while injured? No hands, tentacles, or appendages were raised. That's the problem. In real combat, you're never at your best. You're tired, scared, confused, and everything's going wrong. Humans don't train to be perfect warriors. We train to be functional disasters." Fang tilted his head. "This makes a disturbing amount of sense." Jenkins pulled up one final image, an ancient human battlefield with primitive weapons. "Look at this battle. By all metrics, the force on the left should have won. They had better equipment, more soldiers, better position. But they lost. Know why? The smaller force adapted to changing conditions," Fluff suggested. "Exactly. They got rained on, their high ground turned to mud, and they changed their entire battle plan on the fly. The superior force stuck to their original plan, and got slaughtered." Jenkins looked each cadet in the eye, or sensory equivalent. "That's what I'm trying to teach you. Not how to be humans, you can't be, but how to think like us when everything goes sideways. Because in real combat, everything always goes sideways." Rixbull raised a tentacle. "Commander, I've been reviewing historical footage of human conflicts. Is it accurate that your species often employs what you call trash talk?" Jenkins couldn't help but laugh. "Yes, psychological warfare is definitely in our playbook. And the purpose is to emotionally compromise your opponents. Something like that." The Dorvanian's skin flushed a curious shade of purple. "I would like to attempt this technique." "Be my guest," Jenkins said, amused. Rixbull turned to Clicks and, with all the menace a tentacled philosopher could muster, declared, "Your exoskeleton appears inefficiently designed for optimal nutrient absorption." A stunned silence fell over the classroom, broken only when Jenkins doubled over laughing. "That was, technically, an insult," he managed between chuckles. "But maybe we need to work on your delivery." "Was it not sufficiently aggressive?" Rixbull asked earnestly. "Let's just say humans would phrase it more like, 'Your shell looks like something I'd scrape off my boot.'" The class collectively gasped at such rudeness. "But that would be needlessly offensive," Glows protested. "That's the point," Jenkins explained, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Angry opponents make mistakes. It's not in the Galactic Combat Code, but it wins fights." As the cadets digested this concept with various degrees of discomfort, Jenkins checked his ancient wristwatch. "That's enough theory for today. Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, we're doing something you're really going to hate. Worse than the mud course." Pebble groaned. Jenkins smiled wickedly. "Much worse. We're going to play a human game called Capture the Flag. and I'm not going to tell you the rules ahead of time." As the cadets filed out, muttering anxiously among themselves, Fluff lingered behind. "Commander, I have a question." "Go ahead, cadet. This morning, when I showed you my improvised tractor beam, you approved of it. But isn't that kind of cheating?" Jenkins leaned back against his desk. "Let me tell you something about humans, Fluff. We don't believe in cheating, we believe in winning. There's an old human saying, if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck." Fluff's ears perked up. "So in tomorrow's exercise, anything goes," Jenkins confirmed. "Except actually injuring your classmates. That paperwork is a nightmare." As Fluff scurried out, fur bristling with excitement, Bouncy hovered near Jenkins' shoulder. "Commander, your teaching methods violate 17 Academy protocols." "Add it to my file," Jenkins replied, gathering his materials. "Right next to my combat record." Bouncy's lights blinked in what Jenkins had come to recognize as the AI equivalent of exasperation. "The cadets are discussing strategies already. Cadet Fluff appears to be organizing some sort of alliance structure." Jenkins grinned. "Now that's what I call learning." Dawn broke over a section of the academy grounds that had been transformed overnight. What had previously been a manicured recreational area now resembled a war zone. Trenches cut through the landscape, crude barricades created choke points, and a light mist hung over the whole scene, giving it an ominous atmosphere. Jenkins stood before his exhausted cadets, who had clearly spent the night planning rather than sleeping. Fluff's fur was disheveled, Rixbull's normally smooth skin looked wrinkled, and even Pebble had small stress fractures along his rocky surface. "Welcome to Capture the Flag," Jenkins announced. "The rules are simple: 2 teams, 2 flags." He pointed to opposite ends of the field, where poles had been erected, each carrying a simple piece of fabric. "Your job is to capture the enemy's flag, while defending your own. Bring the enemy flag back to your base to win." "That does sound relatively straightforward," Clicks chittered cautiously. "I'm sure it does," Jenkins replied with a smile that made the cadets nervous. "Teams are as follows. Team 1 will be Vrixbull, Glows, Clicks, and Wobbles. Team 2 will be Pebble, the twins, Fang and Fluff." Vrixbull raised a tentacle. "Commander, these teams seem imbalanced. Team 2 has the physical advantage with Pebble's strength and Fang's speed."
"Life isn't balanced, cadet. Wars aren't fair, figure it out." Jenkins checked his watch. "You have 5 minutes to deploy and strategize." Then the whistle blows. The teams hurried to their respective sides of the field, already bickering about strategy. "Oh, one more thing," Jenkins called after them. "There's a twist. You'll figure it out." The cadets exchanged worried glances before continuing to their positions. 5 minutes later, Jenkins blew his whistle, and the exercise began. At first it seemed like a standard training operation. Team 2 took a straightforward approach. Pebble charged down the center while the twins provided telepathic coordination. Fang slithered through the underbrush, looking for flanking opportunities, and Fluff was nowhere to be seen. Team 1 took a more defensive posture. Vrixbull coordinated from their flag position, tentacles gesturing elaborate battle plans. Clicks set up a perimeter, using their multiple limbs to create tripwires from materials scavenged around the field. Glows floated above, using their luminescence to signal and spot enemy movements. Wobbles was apparently their secret weapon, as the gelatinous cadet had stretched themselves thin across the ground like a nearly invisible trip hazard. "Not bad," Jenkins murmured to Bouncy, who was recording everything. "They're still thinking too conventionally, but it's a start." The first real engagement came when Pebble charged into Wobble's trap, the rock being suddenly found their feet stuck in the adhesive gelatinous substance. "What is this?" Pebble bellowed, struggling to free themselves. "Some kind of prohibited immobilization technique." "It's called improvisation," Vrixbull called back, sounding almost gleeful. While Pebble struggled, Clicks advanced cautiously toward the enemy flag. That's when the first twist became apparent. As the insectoid approached within 10 meters of Team 2's flagpole, a shower of water balloons launched from a hidden mechanism, drenching Clicks completely. "Gah, what is this?" Clicks chittered in alarm, mandibles clicking rapidly as water dripped from their exoskeleton. Jenkins called out from his observation post. "Did I forget to mention the defensive countermeasures? My bad." Fang hissed in alarm as the ground beneath them suddenly became electrified, not enough to cause harm, but definitely enough to send the reptilian leaping awkwardly into the air. "This wasn't in the mission briefing," Fang protested. "Neither is enemy action in real combat," Jenkins replied smoothly. The twins, who had been attempting to use their telepathic abilities to coordinate a pincer movement,
suddenly clutched their heads in pain. A high-pitched frequency emitter had activated near them, disrupting their mental link. That's cheating. Thought gasped. Welcome to human warfare, Jenkins called back cheerfully. As both teams struggled to adapt to the unexpected obstacles, Jenkins noticed Fluff was still missing from the action. The commander scanned the battlefield carefully, trying to spot the furry cadet, when Bouncy chirped an alert. Commander, there appears to be unauthorized access to the field's control systems. Jenkins grinned. Is that so? From where? The maintenance tunnel beneath the eastern section. It appears to be Cadet Fluff. Now that's what I'm talking about, Jenkins murmured approvingly. On the field, chaos was escalating. Team 1 had adapted to the water trap by having glows evaporate the water balloons before they could hit their targets. Team 2 had discovered that Pebble could absorb the electrical shocks meant for Fang, providing the reptilian safe passage. But then the true twist revealed itself. The flagpoles themselves began to move, slowly sliding away from their original positions. The objective is mobile, Vrix Paul shouted in outrage. This violates 17 different sections of standard training protocols. Enemy targets rarely sit still waiting for you to capture them, Jenkins shouted back. As both teams scrambled to adjust their strategies, the real game-changer occurred. Suddenly, all the defensive countermeasures around Team 2's area activated at once, but aimed at Team 2 themselves. Water balloons, pelted Pebble, electrical fields trapped the twins, and smoke obscured Fang's vision. Through the confusion, a small furry figure darted out from a maintenance hatch, sprinted to the now undefended Team 2 flag, grabbed it, and disappeared back underground. What just happened? Glows flickered rapidly in confusion. Before anyone could answer, a muddy, exhausted Fluff emerged from a different tunnel entrance, right beside their own team's flag position, holding Team 1's flag triumphantly. Victory for Team 2, Jenkins announced, blowing his whistle. The cadets gathered in disbelief as Fluff, covered in dirt and what appeared to be mechanical grease, planted the enemy flag next to their own. Explanation, now Vrix Paul demanded, all 8 tentacles quivering with indignation. Fluff looked to Jenkins, who nodded permission. I spent last night mapping the maintenance tunnels beneath the training ground, Fluff explained. Then I located the control panel for the field's defense systems, and reprogrammed them. That's completely outside the parameters of the exercise. Clicks protested. Actually, Jenkins interjected, the only parameters I gave were to capture the flag while defending your own. I never specified how, but using the maintenance tunnels, Vrix Paul began, is exactly what humans call asymmetric warfare. Jenkins finished, using the environment and available resources to overcome a superior force. The cadets fell silent, processing this. Think about it, Jenkins continued. Team 1 had superior defensive strategy and better coordination. In a conventional battle, you probably would have won. But Fluff here didn't fight the battle you expected. They changed the rules of engagement entirely. By cheating, Wobbles burbled, still trying to reform after being spread too thin. By thinking outside the box, Jenkins corrected. In a real combat situation, do you think the enemy will kindly stay within the boundaries you've defined? Follow the rules you've established. The silence that followed was answer enough. Glow's light pulsed thoughtfully. The Hive, they didn't fight according to Confederation tactics. Neither do pirates, or raiders, or anyone else you're likely to face, Jenkins added. And that's the final lesson of human combat training. Expect the unexpected, and be willing to do the unexpected yourself. Fluff shuffled awkwardly under the stares of the other cadets. I just did what seemed logical. The objective was to win, not to win fairly. Jenkins clapped a hand on the furry cadet's shoulder, dislodging a cloud of dust. And that, cadets, is the most human approach possible. Now who can tell me the most important thing you learned today? After a moment, Fang raised their tail. That combat isn't about following rules, it's about achieving objectives by any means necessary. Jenkins said, it's that sometimes, the smartest way to win a fight, is to avoid the fight altogether. Fluff here could have engaged in direct combat, and maybe lost. Instead, they found a different path to victory. He looked around at the muddy, exhausted, but suddenly thoughtful cadets. Tomorrow is your final test. I suggest you all get some rest and think creatively about what might be coming. As the cadets trudged away, Jenkins noticed something remarkable. They weren't walking in their species-segregated groups anymore. Pebble was discussing something intensely with Glows. The twins were chittering rapidly with Clicks, in what appeared to be an attempt to learn insectoid communication. Fang and Wobbles were comparing notes on environmental adaptations, and leading the group, deep in conversation, were Paul and Fluff, the class know-it-all and the unexpected innovator, Tentacles and Paws gesturing animatedly. "They're starting to get it," Jenkins remarked to Bouncy. "Get what, Commander? The real secret to human military success." Jenkins watched as the diverse group of aliens departed, now moving and talking as a cohesive unit. It was never about being stronger or smarter than everyone else. It was about learning from each other, adapting together, and being too stubborn to accept defeat. "Is that an officially recognized human combat doctrine?" Bouncy inquired. Jenkins smiled. "No, but maybe it should be." The Academy's grand ceremonial hall gleamed with its usual polished perfection. Holographic banners representing the various species of the Galactic Confederation hung from the lofty ceiling, and the assembled dignitaries sat in perfect posture, awaiting the graduation ceremony of the elite combat class. In stark contrast to this pristine setting, Commander Jenkins stood at the side of the stage, deliberately refusing to adjust his slightly off-center metal display or fix his intentionally rumpled uniform. Next to him, the graduating cadets were arranged in perfect formation, though a keen observer might notice Wobbles occasionally sending a small gelatinous tendril to adjust Click's uniform, or the twins subtly communicating with eye movements, or Fluff trying not to fidget with what appeared to be some small contraption hidden in their fur. Admiral Zorn, a 12-limbed cephalopod and head of the Academy, floated toward the podium. Esteemed representatives of the Confederation, honored guests, and graduating cadets, the Admiral began, voice resonating through perfectly calibrated acoustic enhancers. "Today we celebrate the completion of our experimental human combat training program. Despite significant methodological differences, the Admiral's eye stalks swiveled briefly toward Jenkins, who smiled innocently. The results have exceeded our expectations." Jenkins snorted quietly. Their final test had indeed exceeded everyone's expectations, especially those of the Academy's senior staff, who had played the role of enemy combatants. No one had anticipated that the cadets would unite into a single team despite being assigned as opponents, use the Academy's communication system to broadcast false intel, convert the cafeteria's food synthesizers into smoke bomb dispensers, or most shockingly, convince the maintenance AI to temporarily adjust the gravity in the combat arena. The fact that Fluff had somehow reprogrammed Bouncy to display false tactical information still had the cybersecurity team working overtime. "And now," Admiral Zorn continued, "a few words from their instructor, Commander Tad Jenkins of Earth." Jenkins stepped to the podium, deliberately scuffing his boots on the immaculate floor. "I'll keep this short because humans don't like long speeches," he began, earning a few uncomfortable chuckles from the audience. "When I first met these cadets, they were the finest examples of Confederation military training, precise, disciplined, and completely unprepared for actual combat." A ripple of indignant murmurs spread through the dignitary section. "Now they're still precise and disciplined when they need to be," Jenkins continued, ignoring the reaction. "But they're also adaptable, innovative, and most importantly, they've learned when to throw the rulebook out the airlock." He turned to face the cadets directly. "You've crawled through mud, broken rules, reprogrammed security systems, and generally been a pain in my backside for 6 weeks. In other words, you've learned to think like humans," he grinned. "And that means you're finally ready to face whatever the universe throws at you, rulebook be damned." The silence in the hall was deafening, until, to everyone's surprise, Brixtall stepped forward. "With permission, Commander, I would like to offer a response on behalf of the class." Jenkins nodded, stepping aside with a curious expression. The Dorvanian moved to the podium, tentacles arranging themselves with formal precision. "Esteemed representatives and honored guests," Brixtall began traditionally, then paused. A mischievous ripple passed through their tentacles. "Actually, forget the formalities. Here's what we really learned." The assembled dignitaries stiffened in shock. "We learned that combat isn't about who has the best technology, the most elegant tactics, or the most comprehensive rulebook," Brixtall continued. "It's about who adapts fastest when everything goes wrong. And trust me, everything always goes wrong." Jenkins couldn't suppress a proud smile. "We learned that strength comes not just from individual excellence, but from combining our diverse abilities in unexpected ways." Brixtall gestured toward the other cadets. Click's precision, Pebble's endurance, Glow's versatility, the twins' coordination, Fang's stealth, Wobble's flexibility, and Fluff's, Well, let's just say innovative disregard for conventional limitations. A nervous titter ran through the audience. But most importantly, Vrixtal concluded, voice taking on an almost human quality of sardonic humor, we learned that sometimes, the best way to survive in a universe full of threats is to be the most unpredictable threat yourself. The Confederation has been fighting wars by the book for millennia. Humans showed up with duct tape and attitude, and haven't lost yet. The Dorvanian turned to Jenkins with all 8 eyes. So thank you, Commander, for teaching us to be functional disasters. The galaxy won't know what hit it. As Vrixtal rejoined the formation, a stunned silence filled the hall, broken only when Jenkins burst into applause, quickly joined by the other cadets. Admiral Zorn's chromatophores pulsed with what might have been either distress or amusement as they hastily concluded the ceremony. Cadets, you are hereby certified as advanced combat specialists. May your unconventional methods serve the Confederation well. Later, as the cadets celebrated in what humans would recognize as a typical post-graduation party, meaning it had quickly descended into competitive storytelling, unauthorized beverage consumption, and at least one impromptu wrestling match between Pebble and Wobbles, the latter unexpectedly winning by simply absorbing and immobilizing the rock being, Jenkins stood at the perimeter, watching with satisfaction. Admiral Zorn floated up beside him. I must admit, Commander, when the Earth delegation suggested this program, I was skeptical. Most are, Jenkins replied, sipping from a flask that definitely didn't contain Academy-approved liquids. Your methods were unorthodox. That's kind of the point. The Admiral's tentacles twisted thoughtfully. The cadets' final assessment scores are quite remarkable. Their individual combat effectiveness has increased by an average of 37%, and their unit cohesion metrics are off the charts. Not surprised. Nothing builds bonds like shared trauma, Jenkins chuckled. Or as we humans call it, team-building exercises. There is, however, one concerning development. Zorn continued. Several of them have submitted requests to continue studying human combat techniques. Cadet Fluff has even applied for an exchange program on Earth. Jenkins grinned. Send them all. Earth's Defense Force would love to have them. You don't understand, Commander. We're concerned about the spread of human thinking throughout Confederation forces. And that's a bad thing because the Admiral's skin rippled with complex patterns. Because the last thing the galaxy needs is more species thinking like humans. One is quite sufficient. Jenkins watched as his cadets, now engaged in teaching each other species-specific combat moves, laughed and bonded across physiological and cultural divides. With all due respect, Admiral, I think that's exactly what the galaxy needs. He gestured toward the celebration. Look at them. 6 weeks ago, they could barely comprehend each other's thought processes. Now they're combining their natural abilities with human adaptability. That's not a threat to the Confederation, it's its future. Before the Admiral could respond, a crash sounded from across the room where Fluff had apparently unveiled some sort of improvised gravity manipulator that was now causing selected objects to float toward the ceiling. Most of the time, Jenkins amended with a wince. Zorn's eye stalk swiveled between the chaos of the party and Jenkins' unrepentant expression. I have a terrifying premonition that this graduating class will either save the Confederation or accidentally destroy it. That, Admiral, Jenkins said, raising his flask in a toast, is the most accurate description of humanity I've ever heard. Welcome to the club. As he moved to join his cadets, Jenkins heard Bouncy's familiar hover behind him. Commander, I've completed my final assessment as requested, and the cadets' psychological profiles show significant changes. They exhibit increased creative problem-solving, decreased reliance on established protocols, improved stress resilience, and, most notably, a 217% increase in what you humans call smartass tendencies. Jenkins laughed. Mission accomplished. Then, there's one more thing, Commander. Bouncy's lights pulsed in what Jenkins had come to recognize as the AI's version of hesitation. The Academy Board has reviewed your teaching methods and the cadets' results, and they've made a decision about the human combat training program. Let me guess, they're shutting it down as too dangerous, unpredictable, and generally un-Confederation-like. Quite the opposite, they're expanding it. You've been assigned 5 more classes over the next year, with cadets from 17 species. Jenkins nearly choked on his drink. You're kidding. I'm an AI, Commander. I don't kid. As Jenkins processed this information, his gaze returned to his graduating cadets. Vrixtal was demonstrating a surprisingly accurate human military salute. Glows had fashioned their light form into what appeared to be a mock-human silhouette. Even stoic Pebble was attempting to tell a human joke. though the punchline was clearly lost in translation. Well, Jenkins said finally, a slow smile spreading across his face, in that case, I'd better start planning some new obstacle courses. I think the next class should start with something really special, maybe something involving quicksand, electronic countermeasures, and possibly a small controlled fire. Commander, Bouncy protested, that violates at least 23 safety protocols. Exactly, Jenkins replied, joining his cadets' celebration. That's lesson 1.